Hey friends, it's Rachel here and I'm back with my second art journal process video. This art journal page is a lot simpler than the first process video that I did because I wanted to show you how you can create an art journal page that has basically no texture. So this is just a single layer art journal page that just has some rubber stamping and some handwriting on it. So I'm using today the Vine border stamp. And this is a really long border stamp. It's 11.8 inches long, so it's almost 12 inches, but it does fit the side, or it goes down the side of a large Dylusions journal. And I'm using that large Dylusions journal here today, but with the nature of the Vine stamp, you don't need to use it just as a border. What I'm doing today on this art journal page is I'm going to be creating like a garden of vines. So I'm doing all of the vines hanging from the top of the page. So I've put the border stamp on a long acrylic block. We've got that acrylic block that fits the size of the border stamps, and I'm just using Archival jet black ink to ink up the stamp and to stamp on directly onto the art journal page. So with this journal, I've used quite a few pages in it already. So there's a little bit of bulk in this side that I'm just about to stamp onto. So I'm just lifting up the other page, so the other side, and just putting a bottle of paint there just to keep that side up. And that'll make this side that I'm stamping onto a lot flatter. And that makes it a lot easier to stamp onto. So I'm just variating the vine, so some of it will go almost down to the bottom of the page, and then as you can see I'm doing here, I'm just making it a little bit shorter. It just gives that nice variety that you would see if you were in the garden of vines. And just a tip, when you actually are stamping or inking up these stamps, I like to ink them several times just to make sure that I do have enough ink onto the stamp, and then I press hard with the palms of my hand just to make sure that is connecting with the paper, especially because I'm stamping onto something that isn't quite flat, because I've got those art journal pages that are underneath. And what I'm doing now here is I'm using a white crayon, and I just want to create a little bit of a resist. So I'm using this is like a white wax crayon, and it will resist some inks when I go into doing some inks later on. And I'm just colouring in the areas basically where the little, I'm not quite sure what you call it, but on the leaves where the veins are, basically. I'm just going to be drawing in where those are just to keep those areas white. And then later on, when I use the inks, it'll resist those areas of the wax crayon. So the crayon, it doesn't matter sort of how intense you want to go. I am only doing the little, the vein parts. If you wanted to do the whole leaf, you could, and you just need to colour in all of the areas of that particular leaf. But because I still want some ink to go onto those leaves, because I still want to colour up various parts of those leaves, I'm not doing the entire leaf. I'm only just, going over just little sections of it there. And once you've done all of that, then you're ready to move on and to add some ink. So now that I've done all of my white crayon, it's time to add some ink, and I'm using Dylusions Ink Sprays. Now these inks are a water-based ink, so they will resist the white crayon when it goes over the top. So I'm just spraying first with some Mushy Peas colour. This is one of the newest Dylusions colours. It's a really nice sort of a light green. It's showing up here on screen to be quite vivid. And it is a nice sort of vivid colour, but it is one of the lighter greens in the entire range. Now I didn't add any water to the page first. I've just sprayed directly onto the dry page because I still wanted to leave some of the speckles. And now I'm spraying over the top with the vanilla custard colour and just blending that in just with the paper towel, just rubbing that over. And then again, now I'm just going a little bit over the top with a few more Mushy Peas sprays just to finish off the colouring of that background. And you can see now where the white crayon is starting to resist through and show through from that colouring of the sprays. So I'm just gently going over it with a heat tool just to dry off some of that background ink before I then go on to colouring in some of these leaves with some more inks. To give the leaves a little bit more colour, I'm going to be using some distress inks just to colour up some of those leaves and just make it a little bit different to the background. So I've started up with some forest moss and I've just swiped it onto my non-stick craft sheet and just spritzed it a little bit with water, and then just picking up some of that ink with a paintbrush just to colour in around the edges of those leaves. And because distress ink is also a water-based ink, it's also going to resist that white crayon. And depending on the colour, like this forest moss that I'm using is quite a deep colour, so it's going to show up fairly dark depending on the intensity of the ink that I'm putting on, and it will show up that white crayon resist quite vividly. And I'm just going around all the little leaves, and I'll continue this until I've done all of the vines, but I'm just going to do green on this one, like the forest moss colour, and then I'm going to move on and use some different colours just to give all of the vines a different sort of shade. One of the things I like about these sorts of techniques is it's just really therapeutic and really relaxing. So you can just sit there and grab some inks and just colour in. You could also use crayons or pencils, or there's heaps of different colorants that you could use. I'm just using the distress inks just because they're nice and easy, and you know, I've got them in my little tin there, and you can just use different colours to get your different vines. But it's a really nice way to spend some time and make a nice page in your art journal. So now I'm just moving on to some different colours. I've done all the green forest moss on all the vines that I wanted to, and that's showing up quite nicely and quite dark. But now I just want to add some orange colours just to give that sort of autumn feel to the vines. So I started off with some of the spiced marmalade distress ink, but I found that that was a bit too light for the leaves because it was still showing quite a lot of the green through. So now I've moved on to some ripe persimmon, and it's a more intense orange and it's showing up quite nicely. You probably can't see it right now here because the distance is still too far away, but the orange is really showing up nicely on those leaves, and it just gives a little bit of a pop from the sort of like green and yellowy background. So I'm just going to continue doing that until I've finished all of those vines, and I just pat off with a paper towel just to get rid of any excess ink. And you can see how vibrant this ripe persimmon is really showing up on these leaves especially, and how that's really nicely popping from that background. So now that I've done all of my colouring of the leaves, I just want to add a little bit of shading around the edge just to give it more of a, I guess you'd say, a grungy feel, but just to give that background a little bit more variation rather than just having that flat green and yellow colour. So I'm using the forest moss. I'm going back to the colours that I was using to colour the leaves in with, and I'm using the forest moss, and I'm just starting on the edges. So I'm inking up, I'm using an ink blending tool. So this tool has a piece of foam at the bottom of it that you can, or piece of Velcro at the bottom of it, where you can add a foam to then blend that ink. So that foam then gets pressed into that ink pad, and then I'm transferring that ink onto the page. And I'm trying to be as careful as I can. So I start from the edge and then work my way in. So the edges, I want them to be a little bit darker, or, you know, quite dark. And then that blending will go into the center of the page. And because I'm working on such a large surface area, because this journal is a 9 by 12 inch size, it's pretty difficult to sponge over the whole lot, you know, in one go. But you need to just keep adding or going back to your ink pad and tapping your ink blending tool onto that ink pad, and then just continuing around to blend in some ink around the edges. And I'm just adding a piece of paper here because I'm finding that I was actually adding ink to all of the pages on that side of my art journal rather than just this one. So I'm just using that just as a mask from the pages underneath. And so I'm just continuing to blend around, and I'm still just using the forest moss, and you can see that I'm starting to bring some of it into the center parts of the page, and that just adds a little bit more depth to the page. And the reason I'm starting from the edge rather than starting directly in the center of the page is if I just went straight to the center, the ink would be a bit too intense and I'd get that circle shape from the foam. So it's a lot easier to start from the edge and then just work your way in. So now I'm moving on to an orange color, and I didn't want to use the ripe persimmon because I knew that that was really intense for those leaves, which is what I wanted, but I still want this to be fairly subtle. So I'm going with a wild honey color, which is a really nice sort of orangey yellow, and it'll work really well with those other colors that I'm doing. So I'm just started just a little bit on the edges, but I'm working my way more into the center with this color than I did with the forest moss, and that's just to give that a much warmer glow in the center and just go over some of those lighter areas. But I still always start from the edge and then just work my way in before the ink has run out on that piece of foam. So I'm just continuing this until I'm happy with my background, and you could go as intense or as light as you like with this. You could even skip when I use the ink sprays completely, and you could sponge an entire page doing this technique, and I have done that. I must warn you, it does after a while, your wrist and arm may get a little bit sore, but it is a really nice way to add some color to your backgrounds. And I really love all the different colors of Dylusions Ink Sprays and the Distress ink pads, so it's just a really nice way to add some color. So now I want to do some stamping, and I have one of my favorite Darkroom Door quote stamps, which is the Dreams quote stamp, and because I thought that would fit really nicely into that little section there on the left hand side of the page. So I just eyeballed it basically and made sure that I had enough ink onto the stamp, and then again, because I'm stamping onto the side of the page or the side of the journal where there's lots of journal pages underneath, I wanted to make sure that I had enough ink on there and that I pressed firmly enough so that the whole stamp would contact. But if you wanted to make sure that you did stamp it correctly, another technique you could use is stamping onto tissue first and then adhering that stamped piece to the journal page with some gel medium. And if you want to know how you can do that, I did that in that first process video. It was already pre-printed pages, but it's basically the same technique. So now what I'm doing just to finish off the page is I'm doing some handwriting on the right hand side, and I'm using some Winsor & Newton ink and a little fountain pen, and I'm just adding some journaling, and I'm just writing in this journal about how grateful I am or how thankful I am to be able to spend some time today just making an art journal page and videoing it and sharing it with you guys. So so that's just a nice little memory for me to put in there, because this journal page was really just about just sitting down and relaxing and just enjoying the process rather than trying to do lots of different layers and techniques and everything. There's just a really simple technique. And it just gives you that sort of nice downtime that we all need sometimes, and we don't need to make every single page a big masterpiece. It can be just a couple of different techniques and just playing with some stamps and some inks and having a little bit of fun. So I hope you enjoyed this journal page. I will be sharing more, so if you'd like to subscribe, so to make sure that you don't miss out, please subscribe. And I'd love it if you hit the like button if you liked what you saw. And if you've got any questions, please leave some in the comments below, and I'll put a complete product listing in the YouTube description below. So you can also see lots of ideas on our website, which is rachelgregg.com, along with inspiration and tutorials on the Darkroom Door blog at darkroomdoor.com. Thanks so much for watching.